Michael Jai White was standing in a boxing ring in Thailand across from Josh Barnett. Barnett had taken the UFC heavyweight title off Randy Couture in 2002. White was also directing the film on an 18-day schedule in heat near 125 degrees under the lights. Long stretches of what those two men did in that ring were never choreographed. They were sparring. White has said that if the producers had fully grasped what their own director was doing, they might have stopped it. 10 years earlier, on the set of Undisputed 2, Scott Adkins threw a tornado kick at him. White scooped the leg from a great height and put him on the floor. Adkins has said it genuinely hurt and knocked the wind out of him. Adkins also said something more useful. White is a real martial artist, no doubt, and he understands precisely how film fighting differs from the real thing. The file has one hole in it. Michael Jai White has never had a professional fight in any combat sport. No boxing bout, no kickboxing bout, no sanctioned mixed martial arts bout. A man the genre treats as the real article has no results column. Adkins is worth staying with because Undisputed 2 holds the clearest evidence in the entire filmography, and it runs backwards from what most people expect. White played George Iceman Chambers, a boxer. Boxers do not kick. In a film built around a Russian prison fighting tournament, the man holding 8 black belts spent the whole movie throwing hands. That was his own decision. White has said the producers originally wanted his character to be a martial artist as well. He argued them out of it. He wanted an arc where a boxer has to humble himself and learn. And he did not believe the film worked with two men throwing identical techniques. So he coached Adkins on boxing technique, pushed him to show everything he had as Yuri Boyka, and took the one role in the movie that hid his own best weapons. Forgotten Fists exists to document the people the record skipped. The rest of this one takes apart what Michael Jai White can actually do, and why almost none of it was ever measured. Adkins has confirmed what the decision cost. Asked whether White grew frustrated at not being allowed to kick, Adkins said he did, and stuck to the character anyway. Between takes, Adkins watched him throw a few kicks to get it out of his system. Adkins gave up something else on that shoot. He wore only fight shorts so he could not pat his arms or his shins, and the whole cast finished the film covered in bruises. Comparing partners years later, Adkins put it in blunt terms. Against White, he could go all out. Boyka turned Adkins into a genre star. Undisputed 2 went straight to video in 2006. The man who engineered that launch and took the smaller technical role to make it work has never been credited for the call. Knowing which weapons to withhold is a fighter's judgment rather than an actor's instinct. That judgment was assembled from 2 men, and neither of them ever appeared in one of his films. 8 of White's black belts sit in karate systems. His actual fighting looks like 2 American kickboxers stitched together. He has named them himself repeatedly. Joe Louis and Bill Superfoot Wallace are the 2 fighters he says he patterned himself after, and he has trained and run seminars with both. Wallace retired undefeated as PKA World Middleweight Champion, 23 wins, no losses, 13 knockouts. He did it kicking with one leg. A judo knee injury left his right leg unreliable, so he built a system around rapid lead leg kicks thrown without setting the foot down. Joe Louis worked from the other end. Power, timing, and a side kick built to stop a man moving forward. Blood and Bone reads differently with that in mind. The thrust kick is his signature. The lead leg hook kick arrives out of nothing. He plants, waits, and fires single shots instead of flurries. The only competition footage he has ever published fits the pattern exactly. In 1987, he entered a point karate event, and in the clip he posted himself, he works almost entirely off the lead leg. Side kick to the stomach, occasional hook kick, barely a punch thrown. His filming philosophy points the same way. White has said he wants to choreograph mistakes and refuses to sell impact with camera tricks because tricks would have hidden what Fred Astaire and Bruce Lee were doing. Larnell Stovall, who choreographed Blood and Bone and Never Back Down 2, described the problem this creates without being asked. Stovall said that if White fights someone small, he looks like a bully, and if he fights someone bigger, the bigger man tends to look slow. Stovall was describing a mismatch he had to hide for a living. On Blood and Bone, the solution was to put Matt Mullins in a suit for the final fight, disguising the size difference so Mullins could show his agility. The belts underneath all of this deserve a harder look. The belt count shifts depending on who is counting, and the disagreement is on the record. White said in 2018 that he holds 8 black belts. Wikipedia lists 9 styles trained and 7 legitimate black belts, sourced to Jet Magazine. His own website records that he tested for and earned his 8th black belt at a Superfoot conference on the 11th of October, 2013. Several outlets converted that line into an 8th degree black belt, which is a completely different claim and looks like a copying error. The styles themselves stay consistent across sources. Shotokan, Goju, Ryu under Eddie Morales, Tangsu-do, Okinawan Kobudo, Taekwondo in both ITF and WTF forms, Wushu, the Superfoot system, and Kyokushin. Kyokushin is the one that carries weight. White has called it the basis of everything he does. Kyokushin competition is fought bare knuckle. Punches to the head are forbidden and punches to the body are not. Fights are won by putting the other man down. His lineage there runs unusually straight. He came up under Shigeru Oyama, who learned Kyokushin from its founder, Mas Oyama, and later headed the US Kyokushin Karate Association. He has also trained with Bobby Lowe and with Shokei Matsui. Lowe was Mas Oyama's first American student. Matsui is a Kyokushin world champion and heads the International Karate Organization today. Even his age is contested. Wikipedia and the Gale reference work give his birth date as the 10th of November, 1967. The Associated Press has listed 1964. He graduated from Central High School in Bridgeport in 1982, which fits the earlier year considerably better. The ambiguity matters more than it sounds. Every claim about what he was doing at 17 depends on which birth year is correct. And the 17-year-old story carries more weight than any belt in the stack. A teenager from Bridgeport, Connecticut walked into a gym to spar with the undefeated world middleweight kickboxing champion. By his own account, that is where the real training happened. White has described the method plainly. He would hear that a fighter had won a championship, then travel to that fighter's gym and spar with him. He was 17 when he became a sparring partner for Bill Wallace, the undefeated middleweight champion at the time. He went to North Carolina to train with Joe Louis. He went to Seattle to train and spar with Maurice Smith. Smith is the name that keeps getting skipped. In July 1997, Maurice Smith beat Mark Coleman across a full title fight at UFC 14 and took the UFC heavyweight championship. A kickboxer outworked the godfather of ground and pound. 12 years later, White cast him in Blood and Bone as an underground fighter called Fast Hands. That same film features Kimbo Slice, Bob Sapp, Gina Carano, and Ernest Miller, plus cameos from Bob Wall and Fumio Demura. The longer list of men White has trained privately with runs through Benny the Jet Urquidez, Don the Dragon Wilson, Gene LaBelle, Billy Blanks, Peter Cunningham, and James Liu. He also trained repeatedly with Van Damme, beginning on the first Universal Soldier in 1992, years before Van Damme registered who he was. By the time they met again on Universal Soldier, The Return, White had carried an HBO film and a New Line release, and Van Damme was surprised to learn it was the same man. Dolph Lundgren connects through the style rather than the industry. White has said the two of them were linked fraternally as Kyokushin practitioners before they ever shared a set. None of that is a fight record. What it documents is which champions opened a gym door for him, which turns out to be the only measurable quantity in the whole file. In 2017, White wrote something about himself that no critic has ever put as sharply. A radio remark about Bruce Lee had turned into a public argument, and White posted a long apology. Buried inside it was a line almost nobody repeated. He wrote that he benefits from the perception himself that most people have never seen him really fight, and that he is taken for a real fighter because of the movies. He followed it immediately by stating that he had been competing well before he was an actor and had sparred and trained with professional fighters all his life. Both halves of that are probably true. Only one half is documented. Because the belts are documented and the training partners are documented and the results are not. One number appears in nearly every profile written about him. 26 titles, including the US Open, the North American Open, and New England Grand Champion. It sits on IMDb, on USA Dojo, in Encyclopedia.com, and in a Bloody Elbow interview, in close to identical wording every time. What never appears is a bracket, a date, or an opponent. The phrasing traces back to a single biography blurb that has been copied for over 20 years. Sources also disagree about what kind of competition produced the titles. Some describe them as Kyokushin titles, which would mean knockdown fighting. Others describe regional Connecticut point sparring. Those are different sports. Knockdown Kyokushin is bare-knuckle body punching until somebody drops. Point karate stops on contact. The single piece of footage White has published is that 1987 point event, and he labeled it himself as his teenage tournament years, which leads straight to the decision he has been asked about for 30 years. Competing would have cost him the career, and he has been direct about why he never did it. White has framed the reason as affection rather than avoidance. Fighters were his closest friends. His plan was to keep building the acting career and use championship gyms as his testing ground. He has also argued in interviews that most fighters end up broke, and that the public discards them the moment they stop winning. That is a career calculation made young by a man who had watched it happen to friends. He turned that belief into casting policy. Fighters past their competitive peak keep appearing in his films, which is how Maurice Smith, Bob Sapp, Kimbo Slice, and Josh Barnett all ended up on his call sheets. The timing worked against competition anyway. UFC 1 landed in 1993. White was already working, and by 1995 he was carrying an HBO film as Mike Tyson. By 1997, he was fronting a New Line release. Nobody offers a working actor with a studio lead a pay cut to get punched in a regional cage. There is one more layer, and it is structural. Kyokushin, his base style, had no professional circuit that paid. American full-contact karate was contracting commercially through the 80s. Point karate handed out trophies. The sports that could have proved him either paid nothing or did not yet exist in a form he could enter. The same 2017 statement contains the other half of his position. He wrote that there was still nobody in mixed martial arts he could not prove himself worthy of going rounds with. He was 49 or 52 at the time, depending on the birth year. Nobody has taken him up on it. So the proof had to come through film instead. And the same industry that lifted him also removed his ability to be verified. Because the movies that show the skill most clearly are the movies almost nobody was given the chance to see in a cinema. $296,000. That is the theatrical gross of Black Dynamite against a budget of $2.9 million. Triple threat, which put him beside Tony Jaa, Iko Uwais, Scott Adkins, Tiger Chen, and Michael Bisping, cost $10 million and took $345,000. Undisputed 2 was a direct-to-video release. Blood and Bone went out on DVD through Sony Pictures Home Entertainment. Never Back Down 2 and Never Back Down, No Surrender both landed on home video. Wikipedia states plainly that most of his lead roles have been direct-to-video or limited theatrical releases, citing film comment and Screen Rant. His one studio lead cuts the other way, and it cuts badly. Spawn opened on the 1st of August 1997, took $87.9 million worldwide against a budget of $40 to $45 million, and holds a 17% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes. He spent most of that film inside a glued-on bodysuit, behind a mask that restricted his breathing, wearing contact lenses that irritated his eyes. Makeup ran 2 to 4 hours a day. A third of the budget went on effects. He built a movement style the stunt team could not copy, so he performed most of the physical work himself, and almost none of it reads on screen as martial arts. The one occasion a major studio handed him a lead, they covered him in latex. Everything after that ran on short schedules and low money. On Blood and Bone and Undisputed 2, he sometimes shot 2 or 3 fight scenes in a single day. The skin trade fight with Tony Jaa was built in one day, and White has said the interior section came together in roughly 10 minutes. Speed became his house style. It also became his ceiling. There is a version of the answer that needs no fight record, and the martial arts world has been filing it quietly for a decade. In 2015, White was inducted into the International Sports Hall of Fame. In 2017, the Martial Arts History Museum added him. In November 2019, at the Urban Action event in New York, Ron Van Cleef, Don the Dragon Wilson, Cynthia Rothrock, and Tamac handed him the mantle of the Black Dragon. Then in November 2025, at the Asian World Film Festival in Culver City, Shannon Lee presented him with the Bruce Lee Award. He became the first non-Asian recipient in its history. Shannon Lee is a longtime friend and, by his account, a former Wushu classmate. White said it was the most heartfelt award he could receive, and that he did not know who Tony, Emmy, or Oscar were, but he knew Bruce Lee. That last detail closes a circle. The argument that embarrassed him in 2014 was about Bruce Lee. 11 years later, Bruce Lee's daughter handed him the trophy that carries her father's name. So the hole in the record stays open, and it stays open by choice. There is no professional fight because he never took one. What sits there instead is a 40-year list of world champions who opened their gyms, kept sparring with him, and then let him put their names next to his. Bill Wallace, Joe Louis, Maurice Smith, Shokei Matsui, Josh Barnett, none of them needed a scorecard to know what was standing across from them. The one thing nobody has settled is what those 26 titles actually were. Some accounts call them Kyokushin titles won under knockdown rules. Others place them on the New England point circuit. The people who would know have never published a single bracket, and 4 decades on, the two versions still sit side by side in the same biography. The honest answer to how lethal Michael Jai White is arrives in 2 parts, and the second part is the uncomfortable one. The credentials are real. The lineage runs straight back to Mas Oyama. The sparring partners were world champions across 3 different sports, and the technique on screen matches the men he learned it from, kick for kick. He was also never tested in a way that produces a number, and he has said so more plainly than any critic ever did. Black Belt has called him perhaps the biggest martial arts star the West produced after Van Damme. He is also the hardest of them to verify, and ability was never the limiting factor. Formats were. The same gap waits for almost every other action star with a wall of belts and an empty results column. The proof is on film. What the film proves is a separate question entirely.